Hi everybody. I was asked by several people over the years to make a movie on my father and his war experiences during World War II. So I'll give you a little bit of his conversations he had with me. Now my dad's been gone for 20 years, but some of his memories are still quite vivid in my mind. He was drafted into the 77th Infantry Division in April of 1944. He was 23 years old then. He eventually got into the 305th Infantry Regiment as a rifleman. So he missed the first parts of the war, but he got into the later days of the war and then into Japan and the occupation forces. The 77th is out of New York, and my dad was from northern Maine, so I suppose that's the closest regiment or the closest division to where he was from. So he was told to report to Georgia, and he told me boot camp down there, it was such a hot summer, so humid, and basically they informed him that he was being trained for replacements for the ones that were killed and wounded. They were needed to resupply the military with bodies. So during basic training, one of the things he hated the most was that he was a small guy. He was like 5'7", 5'6", 150, 160 pounds back when he got in. And they would always put the biggest, fattest, softest guy in the group and made him wrestle and carry and all that against him. And he had to do that kind of stuff because if you didn't, they'd punish you, so you have to do what they say. But he sure hated to do his physical training with that with the fat ones in the group. Another memory is that during bayonet practice, he said that they actually put a Japanese soldier's face on the bags that they were hitting with the bayonets. In time, he said, when at the end of the day or whatever, you have to walk the grounds, pick up the trash and the cigarette butts. He said he would actually, were told to walk the grounds, find a cigarette, and break it up with your hands to release the tobacco, and then just roll the paper up and throw it back down on the ground. I think they call that like field stripping a cigarette, and he was told to do those things so it wouldn't show. One time the drill sergeants in this group approached the whole group and said, "Hey, I got a special job for 3 men. Who has a driver's license?" So half the group eagerly raised their hand, and they wanted to get the hell out of basic training for a while. Then the sergeant looked and pointed, you, and you. You got KP for the next 24 hours. The guys all let out a big moan and stuff, and they were tricked into doing some peeling potatoes and washing floors and stuff. So my father told me, he says, never ever volunteer in the Army. Just, follow along and do what you got to do, but don't volunteer. In my other video on YouTube, how to load the M1 Garand the U.S. Army way, I mentioned in the comments that there was this book that the Army gave my father. I imagine every division in World War II got their book. But this book here, that's their Liberty patch. That's what was on their shoulder. And the name of this book is called Ours to Hold It High, The History of the 77th Infantry Division in World War II, by the men who were there. And the publisher is Washington Infantry Journal Press. This book is 586 pages. So if you want to look into the history of World War II, this is probably one of the best sources of information for this unit. And the other units out there, they have their own novels. And these were written by the war reporters and the journalists. They actually were embedded into the army groups, and they traveled with the armies. And then afterwards they wrote stories every day and reported on what was going on. And so they made a book on their maneuvers and so on. So it's a fantastic book to get your hands on. So if you want to do some research on it, find your own copy. I'm sure they're still out there. The reason I'm bringing up this book is that there's photographs in here of basic training when these guys were going through. And like over here it shows them climbing fences and climbing ropes and things like that. A lot of good pictures in this book. A lot of good reading also. Here is a picture of my father. My mom had it. I don't know when it was taken, and I don't know if he's going or coming, but he's on one of those Liberty ships. And on the bottom of the picture, my mom wrote Dad on it, and he highlighted where he was. And it just shows how these guys traveled on the Liberty ships. And my father said, going over there, he said he had, the Navy was supported him 100%. They had battleships and cruisers and aircraft carriers, and pretty much everything that floated was alongside him going out to the Pacific. Coming back, he said they were not supported. They had no convoys, but going over, he said it was quite impressive to have the whole damn Navy alongside you to protect you. He said it made you feel kind of safe going over. But when he shipped out from basic training, they went to San Diego by train. And then from San Diego they shipped him out to Hawaii. He missed Guam and the very first campaigns. Got to the very tail end of the Philippines. And then he made it to the Japanese islands in Okinawa, and he made the occupation forces. My dad didn't say a lot about combat. I guess if I was there, maybe I'd have more memories, but a few things he told me. One time, the way he was, when I was a kid, in my early 20s, I went to the Army-Navy store, came back with a bayonet, and I was in the garage and I was sharpening the thing up. As I'm in the garage, grinding away, Dad rounds the corner and he looks at me and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm sharpening the bayonet." He says, "For what?" he says. "That'll go right through. So I guess you don't have to sharpen the bayonet." Another thing he told me, he said when you shoot the grenade launcher, he says make sure you put it on the dirt. Don't hold it in your arm because that'll break your arm, he goes. So that's another thing he mentioned about combat. Another time he told me, he said went to the gun range with him and we're shooting the rifles. And he looked around, there was nobody around us, and he grabbed the rifle, he put it to his hip, and he starts to shoot at some clay targets in the dirt about 50 yards out. And he says, "No, it's faster to shoot like this," he says. You don't aim, you just hold it to your hip, and if you see one run, you just put it to your hip and you shoot. And I tried that kind of shooting, hip shooting, and it is pretty accurate. The M1 points real nice. So you can get pretty close with a little bit of practice. So I guess he didn't use his rifle sights that much. when he was moving around. His brother, he served in the 96th Infantry Division, and he was in Company H of the 383rd Infantry Regiment, and he didn't make it over to Okinawa also. But my uncle, he got hit either by a mortar or a grenade, got hit in the back, and he went down. He said he laid in the dirt for like 2 days before the American lines came back and went through the bodies and found him still alive. But he said to me, he said, I had to lay still and play dead because the Japanese were walking over us and looking for anyone still alive, and they would step on you, and if you moan or move, they would bayonet you. So you had to play dead, and he played dead, and he survived the war. And to the day that he died, he had shrapnel in his neck and in his back. After the war, they were diverted over to, he was diverted over to northern Japan and the occupation forces. So basically you're policing the country now, and the U.S. is in charge. So here's his photograph. One of his friends took my picture of a bunch of kids sitting on and around him, and you can see how it's one of the happier moments when the kids, most of them look pretty happy to be there in the picture. So this was probably in 45, maybe 46. But some of the things he talked about when he was there. On March 15, 1946, the 77th Infantry was dissolved. They didn't need all these infantry units no more. The war was over. So they melted him over into the 5th Army Air Corps. And he said living on the air base was pretty good. He said he had a cot every night, and he had his own bed every night to sleep in. And he said it was really good living. It wasn't so formal. You don't have to wear your tie, and you could, it wasn't so formal at all. He's much better living. And they gave him a job to do. His job was driving that deuce-and-a-half truck. So twice a week he had to drive to the shipyard and then back to the airport, the airfield, and shuttle supplies and gasoline. One thing he told me, he said, with his M1, every night he'd lay his blanket down on the cot, and he'd put the rifle down alongside him. The rifle was loaded with the safety on, and he would sleep with his feet to the door. And then he would throw a blanket over the top of him. And I said, Dad, what for? He said, the war is over, right? What are you sleeping in your rifle for? He said, well, I didn't trust the bastards, he said. And if they would come through at night to try to hurt us, I would just flip my safety off and shoot through the blanket. Because I didn't trust the bastards, he said. So even though the war was over, in his mind the war was still quite active, and he just didn't trust the Japanese. He said one thing that he didn't like, and it was such a wasteful thing, he said, is that at the end of the airstrips they brought in some heavy bulldozers, and they started digging huge pits at the end of the airstrips. And they would take a plane, fly a plane in, shut it down at the end of the runway, take the guns off it and the radio, and take the bulldozer and just push it into the pit. And he said there was so much planes that were pushed into those holes and just crushed. And he said that was such a waste. But they'd done that also with the PT boats and all that, and other books if you read. They had huge bonfires of all the equipment they don't want to bring back, so they just destroyed it. One time my dad said in the wintertime, now they said He said the Army supplied him with all the ammunition they wanted. And they told him, you keep shooting, keep practice. If you want to shoot your guns, go ahead. So him and his friend would go out in the fields in back of the barracks. And they'd be target shooting. He enjoyed shooting and he would just blast away. Ammo was free. One day his buddy grabs his 45 pistol and he starts to aim, and they see a power line nearby and they're trying to shoot the power line. After a few attempts, his buddy couldn't do it. My father picked up his rifle and he aimed carefully and he fired, and he hit the damn wire. And he said the power line split. The power line split and it was like striking the ground and bouncing, and you see the sparks coming out. And he said, holy Christ, he said, we put our guns away fast that time. We didn't want to get in trouble because they cut the power to the camp. And so he didn't get in trouble for that, but the poor Japanese workers had to go out and fix the power line. Another time, he told me, he said he's out there shooting again with his buddy, and then they get back in late, and they said there's an inspection first thing in the morning. And my dad, he said he hated the brass and he hated the inspections. So he got his uniform cleaned up and his shoes, but he can't get the rifle cleaned because he doesn't have time. He's been shooting it for weeks and it's as dirty as ever. First light, they had the inspection. So they had the whoever, colonels or generals or whoever walking through. And all the men are standing at attention in a straight line with their rifles to their chest. And my father says, if they stop and inspect my rifles, I'm screwed. They're going to punish me and I'll be in KP for a month. Well, sure as hell, the guy stops. And he said he's watching the guy's arm because they would have a snap motion in the military. So the general or whoever is standing right in front of him. And just as he snapped for my father's rifle, my father said he let go of the rifle and the butt snapped on the ground. So the officer caught the rifle in the second bounce, picked it up, looked at him and called him foolish and stupid and sloppy and shoved it back in his chest and kept on walking. And he says, oh man, he says, you don't know. That trick worked so well because if he would have looked at the rifle, looked down the muzzle, I'd have been screwed. But by doing that, I got away from getting in trouble, so it actually worked out pretty good. Another thought that just came up to me was that when he was driving the Deuce and a Half, he'd be going to and from the shipyard and back to the base. He said all the roads back then were really, really narrow and all small dirt roads. And he said on both sides of the roads there were many rice paddies. And he said the Japanese people, they were kind of like mess with you. He said they wouldn't get out of your way when you're driving up the road. They would kind of like block your path. And then he said he would try to crowd their edge of the road a little bit to try to go around them, and they wouldn't move. They would purposely give you a hard time. And when one or two wheels would drop into the rice paddy, the truck would get stuck. And then they would all start to be all happy and applaud and celebrate because they got the truck in the mud. But then my father said it didn't matter because you just pulled a lever and it was 10-wheel drive and you just back up. But it was another thing that he mentioned about how it was back then. And I got some souvenirs from him during the war. This is actually Hawaiian money, invasion money they called it. It's stamped Hawaii on it. It's brown in color. And they said if the Japanese would have invaded the Hawaiian Islands, they would have devalued the money so it'd be worthless. Well, that's a brown dollar they carried back I got some money from the Philippines over here. It's probably afterwards because it says victory on it. It's probably after the war coming back home. So they have victory on the back of it. It's all wrinkled up. Who knows how many months that was in his pocket. Got some money from the Japanese government. Kind of a different looking kind of money. Some of this might be before and after the war. I don't know. I wouldn't know how to date this money or anything. But he brought it back with him. And I got some, those were his pins. And he only was a private. He said he was doing a sergeant's job, but because the war was over, they wouldn't give raises. And they said if you would re-enlist, we'll make you a sergeant. But he says, nah, I'm tired, I want to go home. That's the Liberty patch that he had on his uniform. He got some medals over here. This is a Pacific campaign medal. He's got another one here that's good conduct medal right here. He has another one that says the World War II medal of some type. And this is another that he had. They served in the occupation forces, so he had another medal that he brought home. Another patch that he had on his uniform. These are the corresponding ribbons that would go on the dress uniform. And the ribbons kind of like correspond with the bars and stripes correspond with the so you see it's sort of they correspond. So they would, I guess, give this to you in a case, and this would be on your shirt. So anyway, okay guys, it's a little rundown of his life in the war. So thanks for watching. Have a good day.